Searching for Christmas by Andrei Hurducas. Narrated by Art Brown. Chapter 1. The Great Orphanage. In a small mountain town, winter made its presence felt unexpectedly. Within a few hours, everything seemed to miraculously change with the fall of snow. The houses, shops, and streets were filled with an unexpected charm, as the white, fluffy layer brought more light, brightness, and joy to people's faces. At some distance from the joy and excitement of the beautiful city, separated by a forest of firs, was the isolated Great Orphanage. In the large hall of the building, there were a lot of children looking to have fun playing, singing, or simply making noise. Ben, a short 7-year-old boy, rushed to the instrument area, grabbing the accordion that was so old and battered that it didn't seem interesting to anyone. A powerful desire to sing had been born in the little boy's heart for some time. After being taught a few chords by the orphanage administrator, he seemed to gain more and more confidence in the idea that he, too, might have a hidden talent. Because the winter holidays were approaching, without thinking too much, he tried to remember the only carol he had ever heard. Even though he didn't know the song very well, Ben started singing with all his heart. "Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King." All the kids stopped and turned their heads in wonder at Ben, who seemed unstoppable despite not knowing much about the song's lyrics, melody line, or chords. He would take a break from time to time, and when he couldn't remember the lines, he would start mumbling or inventing other lines. Within moments, the older boys began laughing heartily at Ben's attempt to stand out, and everyone else followed suit, throwing toys and making jokes at him. The children's voices and shouts echoed from the hall. "Ben, stop this noise! Music is not for you! You're embarrassing yourself!" Others added, laughing from ear to ear. "Hey, Ben, you better go to the nearby forest. Surely the animals will be more pleased to listen to you, but I'm not sure about that either." Finally, one of the big boys, trying to end the moment, walked up to Ben and took the accordion from him, saying, "Music is not for you, boy. You're not going to get anywhere if you keep going like this. Look around you." Dave, a boy 2 years older than Ben, was the only one who, seeing the child's sadness, defended him by speaking in a harsh tone. "Everyone stop it! Why do you behave like this? Maybe Ben's desire to sing would take him further if you refrained from mockery. Shame on you!" There was a silence in the hall that seemed unbreakable. Ben hurried out the door into the garden next to the orphanage, and even though it was cold, he sat huddled on a bench crying and thinking about his dream, which, for a moment, seemed shattered. Worried about Ben, Dave had gone outside to look for him. He bent down and took Ben by the shoulder, saying just this: "Don't give up, Ben. I'm sure you'll be able to sing. Your passion will get you far. Let's go inside." For the first time, little Ben felt that someone was defending him. Chapter 2. Christmas Stories. However, from that moment on, Ben became so discouraged that he did not speak to any of the children. The shame of being mocked by the children in the orphanage seemed to overwhelm him. There were just a few days left until Christmas, and he wanted to stay as far away from those around him as possible. Every year, when the winter holidays approached, the director of the orphanage, Mrs. Matthews, would gather the children together on several evenings and read them various stories related to the Christmas holiday. In this way, she thought, the little ones will forget the absence of parents and will be able to taste a little of the joy of the story characters who, of course, were not deprived of this privilege. On the other hand, the famous story of Jesus Christ being born didn't seem to have many privileged characters. Since no one from Bethlehem wanted to receive the Son of God into their homes, the kids were a little disappointed. Still, while listening to the story, the kids were hoping for a turnout. The younger children of the orphanage had never heard of this holiday's significance, so they sat with their mouths open every time, trying to imagine how the wealthy people of the neighboring town celebrate and enjoy this holiday. Not wanting to attract attention, Ben sat behind everyone, listening with great interest to the town people's Christmas customs, which to him were strange, but also interesting, because he had never seen anything like it. From time to time, the little ones would interrupt the story with questions. Turkey? Cookies? New toys? It would have been different if we had been born in the city. Others would ask in wonder. Do children really sing carols in the streets on Christmas nights? We've never heard anything like it. And is everything lit up in the city? If only we could see them too. Yes, others exclaimed. This Christmas must be beautiful. Maybe we'll find out what that means someday. Isn't that right, Mrs. Matthews? Mrs. Matthews wished she could grant the children's wishes. She didn't want to dash their hopes, so she answered them. You never know where you will end up, my dears. Probably some of you will end up enjoying this holiday sooner than you imagined. All this time, Ben couldn't take his mind off the story about the children singing in the streets of the city on Christmas. The mere idea that such a thing was possible filled his heart with joy. At the same time, the fear of being ridiculed discouraged him from ever picking up the accordion again. The little boy's dream seemed hopeless. Charmed by the beautiful stories which seemed to make them unusually good, all the children went to bed pondering in their minds the beautiful stories of Mrs. Matthews. Chapter 3. The Dream. During the night, Ben had an unexpected dream. He, together with 4 other children, was in the courtyard of the orphanage. Ben was sitting comfortably on a blanket that was held at each corner by one of the children. At one point, the children suddenly lifted the blanket with force, and Ben began to fly so high that he began to scream in fear for help. To his surprise, he did not fall as he expected, but remained high in the air, surrounded by the stars in the sky. From there, he could see the city as he had never seen it before. Everything shone in the streets of the city that seemed enchanted in the dream. Ben stared in amazement at the small town that looked so beautiful and decorated that he felt like he was invited to go there too. In the morning, Ben woke up with a jolt, thinking he was still dreaming. After a few moments, he realized that he was in the room, surrounded by the fast-asleep children. Excited by the beautiful dream, he had not only woken up far too early, but had jumped out of bed and headed for the downstairs lounge. His heart burned out of nowhere with a desire to see the little town that in his dream seemed to invite him. Because he had never actually seen the little town, he was now more determined than ever to get there. He hoped with all his heart that there he would relive the joy and charm he felt in the dream. Feeling restless, he wandered around thinking about how he could fulfill his wish. He felt that he could no longer stay in the orphanage. Arriving in the living room, he saw the accordion. He said to himself, "I have to take the accordion with me if I go to town. Children sing carols around the holidays." He suddenly realized that if he were to go to the city, it would help him a lot to learn to play this instrument as beautifully as possible. As it was very early in the morning and no one was there, the child thought it would be better to take the accordion to a place where he could learn to play without anyone seeing him. "I know," Ben thought. "I'll move it to the basement. No one will hear me there." In Ben's mind, the plan to see the little town seemed to be formulating more and more. He wanted this at any cost. It was only 3 days until Christmas Eve, and every time he had a little free time, Ben would sneak into the orphanage's basement and repeat the Christmas carol. On the first day, he diligently learned the words to the song by heart. The next day, the building manager, who had to take a few bags of potatoes to the basement, caught the boy there, who seemed to be rehearsing assiduously. He was rather surprised to see the child hidden there, but as Ben could not play very well, the man kindly helped him by teaching him to play the carol chords as correctly as possible on the accordion. Of course, the man didn't even suspect the boy's plan. On Christmas Day, Ben prepared all the necessary things for his getaway. In the basement, he had his backpack with some food, his accordion, and his old pair of boots. His heart was pounding, trying to overcome his fear of doing something that ultimately sounded crazy even to him. At the same time, he didn't want to give up at the last minute. After all, this beautiful celebration was only once a year. He wanted to seize the opportunity and was more determined than ever to make his dream come true. Chapter 4. The Christmas Eve Adventure. Christmas Eve was getting closer, and all the children had gathered in the living room. Mrs. Matthews was waiting for all of them to come in to celebrate Christmas together. Ben entered the living room as well, but all this time thinking of the perfect moment when he would be able to sneak out of the house in such a way that he would not be noticed. At the same time, he was quite restless, and this could be read on his face. "Ben, what's up with you? You seem restless. Calm down," one of the kids told him. "He could be planning to delight our ears again with his talent," added another boy in a very sarcastic tone. Ben didn't seem at all affected by the words of the boys around him. Nothing could bring him down at this point. His only concern was to run away to the dream city. Before long, they were all invited to the festive meal, which was a meal like any other. There was nothing special about it for the children. The long-awaited moment was when the children were invited to the main room to receive the quite basic gifts given by the mayor of the city. No one came to give them personally. They were delivered by a coachman and strategically placed in the corner of the great hall for the eagerly awaiting children. "Ready, kids? Come all into the main hall," said Mrs. Matthews with a broad smile, anticipating the joy of the children. Without waiting, all the children rushed into the living room, lest any of them should be left without a present. Everyone but Ben, because no one was paying attention to anything besides their gifts. The boy disappeared in an instant. In a few moments, he was already out in the winter cold, well-dressed, equipped with a backpack full of food from the Christmas table, and with his accordion hung in front with great care. He was walking a little slow with so much luggage, but what did that matter when the adventure of his life awaited him? After walking out the big door of the orphanage, he felt a strong hand on his shoulder stopping him in his tracks. "Where do you think you're running, young man?" For a few moments, Ben felt his whole plan fall apart. He was speechless with fear, unable to say anything, especially since it was night and he couldn't see who the person was. "It's me, Dave. You didn't think I'd just let you leave without me." "But how did you know I was going to leave?" Ben had asked, his voice still shaking. "I've been following you all this time. I was sure you were up to something. I'm not going to leave you alone, especially since I want to go into town too. After all, isn't it more fun traveling together?" "Of course," Ben said. The little one hugged Dave, reminding himself again that he had a friend who stood up for him and who was always watching over him, ready to offer his help at any time. "Let's go," Dave exclaimed. "We don't want to miss the city celebration." The two set off together through the snow, which by this time was quite deep. Ollie, the orphanage dog, appeared behind them, and upon hearing the boys' voices, ran towards them and was now following them as they went. Dave took his friend's backpack to lighten his load and turned on the lantern that lit their path in the thick darkness outside. The journey was not easy through the deep snow, but with the companionship of the two boys, everything seemed easier. Gradually, Dave and Ben got closer to the fir forest that separated the town from the orphanage. Everything seemed much darker, because here the stars and the moon were no longer visible, and now and then the sounds of the forest made the boys turn their heads left and right to make sure no danger was approaching them. Dave, are you sure we're on the right track?" asked Ben, looking increasingly unsure of his decision to leave. "Sure I do," answered Dave confidently. Although he wanted to sound confident, Dave also had some fear, but he didn't want to let it show. The rustling of the forest and the hooting of the owls grew louder as the boys advanced through the tall, towering firs whose branches lay pressed under the thick snow. Only Ollie seemed to walk carelessly after the boys, as if he too were part of the forest animals. As the road seemed more and more tiring, at one point Dave tripped over a branch hidden under the snow. "Dave!" Ben shouted. "Did you hurt yourself?" Ben's voice was loud enough to be heard a good distance away. In the distance came the fierce barking of what appeared to be a wolf. Upon hearing the wild animal, the two boys froze. "Dave, what do we do now?" Ben asked. "Give me your hand," Ben shouted. After standing up, Dave took Ben's hand and they both started in a rush that seemed to never stop. The sound of the wolf, which was not seen but was following them in the darkness, was constantly heard from behind. Ollie, the dog, who didn't seem intimidated by the wolf, barked incessantly in the direction of the wild beast, all the while staying behind the boys, ready to protect them at any moment. The two boys' powers were starting to weaken, and they were slowly losing more and more of their speed. Looking behind them constantly, the boys had now noticed the wolf getting closer and closer to Ollie. After taking a few more steps, they suddenly found themselves out of the forest, on the rather steep slope of a hill covered with snow and a lot of ice. Suddenly, Ben and Dave were sliding down the slope, uncontrollably picking up speed. Ben lost the accordion rolling down the hill. They abruptly stopped at the bottom of the hill, one with his head in the snow and the other buried up to his waist. After making sure that neither of them were hurt, the boys started laughing out loud at each other. Being covered in snow from head to toe, they both looked like snowmen. After they both shook off the snow and Ben retrieved his accordion, the boys realized that they had escaped the dire wolf that remained high in the forest. They were overjoyed and relieved that they succeeded. However, they soon realized that Ollie was lost. Because they were unable to reach out to the dog, the boys felt so sorry. Heavily hearted, Dave and Ben had to continue on their way. Chapter 5. The City. After a few more minutes of walking, the dream city could be seen from above. It looked just like in Ben's dream. Each house was lit by the candles that were placed in the windows. From a distance, everything looked bright, and the bustle of people could be heard from a distance. Ben couldn't contain his joy. The long-awaited dream was beginning to come true. Once they entered the small town, the two kept turning their heads to marvel at the beauty of the buildings decorated for the celebration. Shop windows were decorated with garlands, tinsel, and all kinds of toys, easily catching the eyes of passers-by. In the center of the city, near the church, there was a huge Christmas tree, meant to attract the astonishment of all who passed by. "Wow, Dave, it's amazing! All I want now is for us to sing to the people, just like in Mrs. Matthews' stories." The streets were full of people. Indeed, as was the custom, there were also many children walking from house to house, singing the carols they had learned so diligently. Whether they understood the message of the carols or not, everyone enjoyed hearing them, which could only be heard once a year. Seeing what the other children were doing, Dave and Ben also began to carol along the streets of illuminated shops. Because people did not know them and were very suspicious of foreigners, no one wanted to listen to their carols. The fact that they were wet from the snow, untidy, and not dressed for the holiday like the other children caused people to drive them away. The boys were getting more and more discouraged. Still, Dave insisted, "Let's try again at the corner store." Because on Christmas, children received all kinds of cookies after caroling in the streets, a kind of jealousy was created. As the two entered the store, another group of children rushed towards them, speaking very harshly. "What are you looking for here? Are you from the city? We've never seen you before." "We're from the orphanage near the forest. We would like to sing too." "Get out of here immediately! Cakes are just for us." "But we just want to sing," insisted Dave. Because the two boys wouldn't give up, the children of the town started throwing snowballs at the two friends, beginning to run them off the town street. And behold, the two were again on the run, when suddenly a large dog jumped from a neighboring street, barking fiercely at the children of the town. "Ollie!" Ben shouted. The children of the town ran back from the dog, which had miraculously survived the attack of the wolf in the forest. Dave and Ben were very happy to see the dog spinning in circles with his tail wagging. However, the boys were a bit disappointed with the experience of the people on the beautifully decorated street. The place was beautiful, but the heart of the people was so cold. The two hopelessly wandered the streets of the city, feeling sorry for themselves. "Nobody wants to welcome us, Dave. It reminds me of the story of Christmas, where nobody wanted to receive Jesus," sobbed little Ben. "I'm sorry, Ben. I was also hoping that this holiday would be much nicer. Maybe it's better to go back to the orphanage after all." Time flew by as the poor boys roamed the town, getting further and further away from the central area. Because it was late, the lights of the houses went out one by one. Only Dave's lantern still lit the road that seemed to lead nowhere. The two had arrived at the beginning of a side street. The thick layer of snow looked so smooth, brilliant white, untouched by any trace of a person. It looked like a road no one had walked on in the last few hours. The children started walking down this road, stopping in front of the only lighted house on that street. The wide-open gate of the house seemed to invite you to step inside. Without hesitation, Ben and Dave, being hungry, soaked to the skin, and tired, had confidently entered. The door was opened by Mr. Clark, who greeted them with a big, warm smile, as if he had seen children for the first time in his life. His wife immediately joined him. "Come in, dears. You are welcome." Seeing the delight on their faces, Ben took out his accordion and began to confidently play. "Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing." The children's carol now sounded more beautiful than ever, being listened to with great enthusiasm by this family. Ben could feel the appreciation that was easily read in the eyes of the two of them. Mr. Clark invited the children to the abundant Christmas meal, where they tasted the delicacies prepared with the greatest care. Then they received the gifts that seemed to be prepared especially for them. It was the first time that Ben and Dave felt the love and warmth of the people of the beautiful city. Mr. and Mrs. Clark listened in astonishment to the story of the two, laughing profusely at the adventures experienced that day. The hosts never had children. They had wanted all their lives to hear their sound and joy, which otherwise beautifies every home in this world. That night seemed to be incredibly beautiful for the family and the children as well. It all changed, though, when little Ben was heard saying, "This is where I want to stay from now." Of course, this was Dave's wish as well. Later, the Clark family reached the orphanage and made a request for adoption, which was quickly approved, as the staff wanted to welcome other abandoned children. The love of the couple grew so much for the two children that they decided to welcome the children into their family for good. Thus, Ben's dream and hidden talent would change their lives forever. All this with the help of Dave, who proved his friendship and faithfulness even in the most difficult moments. Ben and Dave were given the most loving hugs by the beautiful couple. It was the first time that the little ones discovered the joy of Christmas.